The castle was silent as Victor Frankenstein knelt by his son's lifeless body, his trembling hands clutching Hubert's cold, pale skin. Lightning cracked outside, casting fleeting shadows across the walls, as if the world mourned the loss. Hubert had been Victor's only child, a glimmer of humanity in a life otherwise dominated by ambition and experimentation. Now that humanity lay still, forever lost. Victor's mind raced, grasping at fragments of memories. Hubert's laughter, his curiosity, the warmth that once filled the castle when Hubert was alive. But grief quickly twisted into desperation. Victor was a man accustomed to pushing the boundaries of life and death, yet here he was, helpless. The young man who had called him father was gone, and all his knowledge, all his power, felt meaningless in the face of this finality. But Victor was no ordinary man. Desperation turned to obsession, and obsession became resolve. His mind ignited with a dark possibility. Perhaps he could still save Hubert, even if it meant defying nature itself. Victor glanced at the rows of vials he had once dismissed as failures, neon fluid, a serum he'd concocted that had proved unstable in earlier trials. He called it the electric serum, a potent blend designed to simulate life itself. Victor was willing to gamble everything in his madness on one final forbidden experiment. Victor gathered the equipment, feverishly setting up a makeshift laboratory around Hubert's body. He injected the electric serum into his son's veins, watching it flow through the dead body with each injection. He could feel his own heart beating faster, terror mingling with hope. Finally, he connected a set of metal rods to his son's skull, tuning to the storm raging outside. He raised a lightning rod into the night sky, welcoming the coming strike, willing it to bring Hubert back. The first bolt of lightning crashed down, sending a surge of electricity through the rods and into Hubert's body. The young man's limbs jolted, his eyes flickering open for a moment. Victor felt a surge of hope that quickly faded as Hubert's eyes closed again. A second, then a third bolt struck, each one charging Hubert's body with raw energy until the serum within him began to glow. And then, miraculously, his son moved. Hubert's hand clenched, his eyelids fluttered, and a faint, unearthly glow pulsed from within his veins. Victor gasped, joy flooding his voice as he whispered, "My son, you're alive!" But the body that stirred was no longer the son he remembered. As Hubert's eyes opened, Victor saw something cold, something wrong in his gaze. A vacancy, as if part of him had been stripped away in death and replaced with something monstrous. The electric serum had brought Hubert back, but it had also transformed him. His veins glowed with an eerie neon light, and a faint hum of electric energy radiated from him, like a machine brought to life. At that moment, Victor realized the cost of his obsession. He had brought Hubert back, but the boy he loved was now something else entirely, a creature sustained by both science and dark magic, a zombie king. In shock, Victor stumbled backward, his eyes filling with horror as he whispered, "What have I done?" Hubert, now more creature than human, slowly sat up, his movements jerky, like a marionette animated by invisible strings. The once gentle expression on his face was replaced by something colder and hollow, and a faint flicker of anger burned within his neon-lit eyes. He looked at his father, a fragmented sense of recognition glimmering, and Victor felt the weight of his actions bear down on him. He had crossed the boundary, and in doing so, he had unleashed something terrible upon himself, his castle, and perhaps the world. Hubert's world was a disorienting fog, a haze of fractured memories and sensations that felt both familiar and alien. He sat in the cold, sterile laboratory, blinking as the faint neon glow pulsed through his veins. His movements felt stiff and unnatural, as if he were held together by something invisible yet forceful. The memories that lingered were scattered, echoes of laughter, his father's face, the warmth of sunlight. But when he tried to reach for them, they slipped through his mind like sand. Victor watched his creation with a mixture of pride, guilt, and dread. His son, or what was left of him, had been resurrected. But he could see it plainly. Hubert was no longer simply his son. The electric serum had altered him, fusing him with an energy that felt more like possession than life. And as Victor looked into his eyes, he saw not the young man he had loved, but a stranger, a king bound to a dark realm of his own. "Hubert," "Do you recognize Mem?" Victor's voice trembled, desperation woven through every syllable. Hubert's gaze shifted to his father, and for a brief, fleeting moment, there was a flicker of recognition, a shadow of warmth that seemed to bridge the gap between father and son. But just as quickly, it faded. The neon glow in his veins pulsed stronger, and his voice came out slow, crackling as if struggling to piece itself together. "Father, what happened to Mem?" His voice sounded both foreign and broken, a metallic echo that sent chills down Victor's spine. Victor swallowed, his heart pounding. He knew he couldn't hide the truth. You were gone, Hubert. I had no choice. I couldn't let you go. I used the serum, harnessed the storm." His words trailed off as the weight of his actions settled heavily on him. Hubert looked down at his hands, the glow beneath his skin illuminating the stitches that held him together. He clenched his fists, feeling the raw electric power that hummed within him, filling him with both life and rage. Memories of his death began to resurface, shards of pain, flashes of his final breath. The realization hit him like a strike of lightning. He was a patchwork of parts, a puppet to the currents that sustained him. In a sudden surge, Hubert rose to his feet, unsteady but determined. He towered over Victor, his once gentle eyes now burning with fury. You brought me back. Like this?" His voice grew stronger, a dark, booming echo that resonated through the laboratory. Victor took a step back, feeling both pride and terror at the raw power emanating from his son. "Hubert, I did this. I did this because I couldn't lose you. You're more than just my son now. You are a king among the undead, a being with powers beyond imagination." But Hubert's gaze was cold, a reflection of the monstrous reality forced upon him. "I didn't ask to be a king, father," he said, his voice low, edged with resentment. "You brought me back, but at what cost? I'm a monster." Victor's eyes filled with remorse, the gravity of his choices settling on him like a weight too heavy to bear. He reached out, but Hubert took a step back, rejecting the gesture. "Hubert, you must understand, this is more than just life or death," Victor pleaded, his voice cracking. "I created you anew, with the storm's power, with science and magic combined. You are more than human now, more than anything we could have dreamed." Hubert's metallic voice echoed in the chamber. "No, I am not what I was, I am something else, a prisoner to this electricity, to this body held together by your hand." The anger in his words sent a pang of regret through Victor, but it was too late to turn back. They stood in silence, father and son, each grappling with the consequences of Victor's choices. And then, in a final act of defiance, Hubert turned away, stepping into the shadowed corridors of Castle Frankenstein. The castle's halls stretched before him like a dark labyrinth, filled with the echoes of forgotten lives. Victor watched him go, feeling his heart shatter with each step his son took away from him. He had resurrected his son, yes, but in doing so, he had created a king whose throne was built on agony. "I didn't save you, did I?" Victor whispered. The laboratory was filled with the scent of ozone and the sharp tang of chemicals as Victor Frankenstein worked through the night, feverishly driven by a need to redeem himself. His hands, stained with evidence of countless experiments, trembled as he prepared the neon serum, watching the dark liquid swirl and settle with the viscosity of blood. Outside, lightning flashed over the mountains, casting a fleeting glow through the high, narrow windows of Castle Frankenstein. It had been years since he'd brought Hubert back, months spent watching his son become something more monstrous than human. Hubert had returned, yes, but he was changed, colder, haunted by voices not his own. Victor had done this to him, dragging him back from death and binding him to an unnatural existence. Now, desperation gnawed at Victor, driving him to a new, even darker ambition, to create a companion for Hubert, a soul who might understand his son's torment. The idea took root in Victor's mind like a poison. Elena, he decided, would be Hubert's counterpart, the one soul who might soothe his agony and give him the stability Victor's experiment had torn away. She would be a partner, a queen to the monster he had made a king. Victor knew where to begin. He'd come across her remains in his search for suitable bodies. A woman of quiet elegance and haunting beauty, known for her poetry and sharp wit. She had been misunderstood in life, dismissed for her unusual interests and sharp mind, a woman unfit for the world she was born into. But here, in death, she would find purpose. She would be reborn as Hubert's equal. With careful precision, Victor pieced together her body, stitching limbs, bones, and tissue with practiced hands, all the while muttering to himself, coaxing his mind to focus. To create a being that would complete Hubert's broken soul. He filled her veins with the same electric serum that now coursed through Hubert, and, as a final act of devotion, embedded a lightning rod into her chamber, channeling the energy directly into her lifeless form. When everything was in place, Victor stepped back, holding his breath. Thunder rumbled through the castle, and he raised the lightning rod once more, calling the storm's wrath down into his creation. The room flooded with light as bolt after bolt of raw power struck, coursing through the body of the lifeless woman on his table. Her limbs jolted, and Victor's pulse quickened as her eyes fluttered open, revealing a distant, spectral gaze that was both empty and somehow ancient. She took her first breath, then a second, her hand slowly clenching as if testing its existence. Her gaze moved to Victor, filled with a calm understanding that unnerved him, as though she had accepted her new reality long before he'd even dreamed of it. "Elena," Victor whispered almost reverently, "welcome back." She looked at him with quiet curiosity, her expression revealing neither fear nor anger. Slowly she rose, moving with a fluid grace that defied the nature of her reanimated form. Though her face was pale, her presence filled the room, commanding a silence that echoed with unspoken wisdom. She looked at her hands, at the stitches binding her body, and gave Victor a solemn nod as though understanding everything he had done, everything he had risked to bring her here. Victor marveled at her calm, at the eerie stillness she projected. "Elena," he continued, his voice trembling with a mixture of pride and guilt, "I have created you for my son. You will be his guide, his equal, perhaps even his salvation." She tilted her head, absorbing his words. There was no rage in her, no rejection, only a quiet acceptance of her place in this twisted world. And then, as though summoned by an unseen force, Hubert appeared at the doorway. His massive figure filled the room, his veins glowing with the electric serum that pulsed within him. He stopped, staring at the figure before him, unable to hide his shock. His voice, still raw and jagged, broke the silence. "Father, what have you DD1?" Victor stepped forward, his eyes wide with fervor. "Hubert, this is Elena. I made her for you. She's here to be your companion, your queen. You no longer have to bear this burden alone." Hubert's gaze shifted from Victor to Elena, his face unreadable. She returned his gaze with a quiet strength, her eyes holding his without flinching. She was his mirror, a being caught between life and death, stitched together with the same serum, bound to the same fate. But unlike him, she radiated a calm acceptance, as though she had already come to terms with her existence in this dark kingdom. After a tense silence, Elena took a step toward him, her voice soft but unwavering. "Hubert," she said, her tone soothing yet firm, "I am here for you. We share the same fate, and together perhaps we can make sense of it." Hubert's hardened exterior cracked, and the anger and confusion in his eyes softened by her words. He reached out, and she placed her hand in his, their fingers intertwining, both pulsing with the faint neon glow that tethered them to this unnatural life. Victor watched, feeling a hollow satisfaction as he witnessed the connection between them. He had given Hubert the one thing he could not give himself, a chance at solace, a partner in this cursed existence. He knew he had crossed a line, but as he looked at them, Hubert, the king of his twisted legacy, and Elena, the queen he had forged to stand by him, he felt he had finally succeeded. The moon hung heavy over Castle Frankenstein, its light casting eerie shadows across the stone walls. Inside, Hubert paced the cold halls, his mind a tangled mess of voices, memories, and power that felt both like his lifeline and his prison. The neon serum pulsed faintly beneath his skin, illuminating his stitches as he wrestled with the two minds trapped within him, his own, and the remnants of Igor's cunning whispers. But even that inner conflict seemed to pale against the tension rising in the castle tonight, as though a storm loomed, unseen. Outside, the ground trembled as a lone figure approached, moving with a feral grace, his shadow stretching long under the full moon's light. The wolfmen had arrived. And then, with a crash that shook the stone foundations, the wolfman burst through the castle doors, his eyes wild and his muscles tensed, every inch of him ready to fight. As the wolfman prowled through the shadowed hallways, his breaths heavy with frustration and rage, his claws scraped against the cold stone walls as he searched the castle, overturning tables and peering into dark, cobwebbed corners. He hadn't come here to make friends, nor to join Hubert's twisted kingdom. He had come here seeking one thing, a cure, and he would stop at nothing until he found it. The hallways echoed with the snarling fury of his hunt, and every inch of the castle seemed to respond to his presence, the walls groaning as though alive. The wolfman's patience wore thin as he scoured the laboratory chambers, searching through shelves of strange vials, glowing liquids, and alchemical contraptions. He snarled, frustration building as the hope of salvation slipped further away with each failed attempt. Finally, he reached the heart of the castle, Victor Frankenstein's private chambers. Bursting through the door, he found Victor alone, hunched over a table of scattered papers and open journals, his pen racing as he scribbled furiously. The scientist barely looked up before he felt the hot breath of the wolfman on his neck. Victor froze, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and intrigue. The wolfman's massive clawed hand gripped Victor's shoulder, pinning him in place with the strength of a creature who had no intention of bargaining. "I know what you are, Doctor," the wolfman growled, his voice laced with bitterness. "You're the man who plays God, the one who twists life and death. And now you're going to use that power for me." Victor swallowed, his mind racing as he pieced together the desperate fury behind the wolfman's words. You seek a cure for your curse," he said carefully, trying to hide the flicker of fear in his eyes. "But even if I could help, it would take time, experiments, equipment." The wolfman's grip tightened, his claws digging into Victor's shoulder. "Time is not something I have, Doctor. You brought your son back from death itself. Surely a curse is a smaller feat." Hubert sensed the intruder before he saw him, a primal instinct tightening in his gut. He felt the raw, animalistic force radiating through the air as the creature drew closer. "Who dares trespass in my domain?" Hubert's voice was a low growl, layered with both human anger and a monstrous power. The electric energy around him surged, illuminating the veins beneath his skin like liquid lightning. At that moment, Hubert appeared in the doorway, his towering form silhouetted against the flickering torches in the hall. His electric glow pulsed faintly, illuminating the scene with an eerie, ghostly light. His gaze moved from Victor to the wolfman, and a cold anger flashed in his eyes. "Release him," Hubert commanded, his voice low and deadly. The wolfman snarled but didn't move. "Your father is the key to breaking my curse, Frankenstein. And until I have a cure, he's my insurance." Victor struggled to breathe as the wolfman's grip tightened, but Hubert stepped forward, his expression hardening. "There is no cure," he said, his voice both pained and resolute. The wolfman's eyes locked onto Hubert, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other, two creatures bound by fate, each bearing the weight of their monstrous existence. But words were soon abandoned, as the primal need to fight overtook them both. The wolfman lunged forward, claws outstretched, his howl reverberating through the castle. Hubert countered, his body charged with electric energy as he met the assault head-on. Lightning flashed overhead as they clashed, illuminating the castle in brilliant bursts of blue and white. Hubert's fists crackled with electric power as he struck, each blow charged with a force that could have killed any regular mortal. But the wolfman was no mere mortal. His curse granted him a strength that matched Hubert's, a raw, unyielding power fueled by the moon above. They fought through the halls, tearing through walls and sending shattered stones crashing to the ground. Hubert's electric energy sizzled, searing the wolfman's flesh with each blow, but the beast's wounds closed almost instantly, his body regenerating as quickly as Hubert could strike. The wolfman in turn clawed and bit with savage fury, his primal strength challenging even Hubert's undead resilience. As they struggled, something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. Both creatures, though different in form, were bound by curses beyond their control, trapped in monstrous bodies that defined their every moment. Hubert's electric hum and the Wolfman's lunar power were symbols of the torment that connected them, two beings shaped by forces they could neither escape nor fully comprehend until they stopped fighting. Hubert studied him, a strange empathy sparking within him. He too had sought an end to his torment, only to be denied the peace of death and brought back to life as something neither fully alive nor entirely dead. Now, facing this cursed creature, he felt the weight of his fate pressing upon him. "There is no cure for what we are," Hubert said, his voice carrying a bitter resignation. "Only acceptance." The Wolfman's face twisted with a mixture of anger and despair. "Acceptance? I'm a beast, cursed to walk in shadows, forever bound to the moon's cycle. And you, monster Frankenstein, what are you?" Hubert's jaw tightened, the words sinking into him like poison. "I am an abomination," he admitted, his gaze hardening. "Brought back to life by forces that should never have been tampered with. But in this state, in this twisted existence, I have found purpose." The Wolfman's snarl softened into a weary sigh, his shoulders sagging. "And what purpose is that, ruling over this haunted castle, forever tied to the storm that gave you life?" Hubert glanced around at the crumbling stone walls, the broken remnants of the life he had once known. His gaze shifted to the faint glow of the neon serum pulsing within him, a constant reminder of the unnatural force that kept him alive. "Perhaps," he replied. A silence fell between them, thick with unspoken understanding. They were creatures bound by curses, shaped by forces beyond their control, and though their paths were different, their suffering was the same. In that moment, Hubert saw the possibility of something beyond rivalry, an alliance, however fragile, forged by shared torment. Hubert glanced at Victor, who staggered back, rubbing his bruised shoulder, and then returned his gaze to the Wolfman. "Perhaps there is no cure, but you could stay," Hubert offered. "My father can continue his work. There are always experiments and concoctions to test. A cure may be beyond him, but at least here you won't be hunted. You would be, among kin." The Wolfman let out a dry laugh, his eyes shifting to Victor, then back to Hubert. "And what kind of kin are you offering me, Frankenstein? A monster like you?" Hubert's expression softened, a shadow of pain flickering across his face. "Perhaps, but here at least your curse doesn't have to be a punishment. In Castle Frankenstein, you can be something other than prey." Victor, still rubbing his shoulder, watched the exchange with wary intrigue. He knew what Hubert was offering. A twisted salvation, a place for the Wolfman to exist without fear, a purpose that perhaps even Hubert himself was still searching for. But he also saw the risk, bringing a cursed beast into their fold, one that could tip the delicate balance of the castle's power. The Wolfman considered Hubert's words, his feral eyes filled with a mixture of resentment and curiosity. The castle, dark and foreboding as it was, offered a sense of security he hadn't known in decades, a refuge from the relentless hunts, the hunters who tracked his every move. And though he loathed the idea of surrendering to his fate, he saw the sense in Hubert's offer. Finally, he nodded a reluctant acceptance. "Very well, Frankenstein. I'll stay. But know this, if I sense you betray me, even for a moment, I will tear this castle apart stone by stone." The night was restless, thick with the rising fury of an angry mob as they stormed through the forest, torches blazing and weapons raised. They had heard the rumors, the dark experiments, the unholy creatures hidden within the walls of Castle Frankenstein. The villagers had finally reached their breaking point, fed up with the unnatural horrors that lingered above their homes. They marched with righteous anger, their chants echoing through the trees, fueled by fear of the unknown. Inside the castle, Victor Frankenstein worked feverishly in his laboratory, his hands a blur as he mixed vials of neon serum with new ingredients he had procured from secret forbidden sources. His mind was sharp, racing with calculations as he tested an idea he had once dismissed as impossible. The Wolfman's curse was ancient, tied to dark forces beyond his control, but Victor knew he was on the edge of a breakthrough. If he could isolate the primal essence of the curse and suppress the lunar pull, it could work. The answer was right there, tantalizingly close. But He couldn't do it alone. Above him, the castle shook as the furious mob began pounding on the heavy iron doors. Hubert and the wolfmen stood on the balcony overlooking the front gate, watching as the crowd gathered, their faces contorted in rage and terror. Hubert's eyes narrowed, his electric veins pulsing with barely restrained energy, while beside him, the wolfman growled low, his instincts flaring as he felt the mob's hatred aimed directly at him. "They're here for me," the wolfman muttered, claws flexing as he prepared to leap into battle. Hubert gave a curt nod, his gaze fixed on the mob below. "Then we give them what they came for," he replied, his voice cold, yet laced with a strange sense of duty. "If we don't stop them here, they'll tear this place apart." The two cursed beings shared a final glance, a fleeting understanding passing between them. For all their differences, in this moment, they stood united against a world that saw them as nothing more than monsters. They descended the steps and moved toward the main hall, each step heavy with purpose. As they reached the doors, Hubert held out his hand, his body crackling with electric energy that surged through his veins. With a forceful push, he threw the doors open, and the mob stopped, stunned by the sight of the towering figure before them, glowing faintly with otherworldly power. "You came for monsters," Hubert's voice boomed, echoing through the courtyard. "And here we are." The mob hesitated, their torches flickering as fear mingled with their anger. But one brave soul stepped forward, raising his weapon high. "We'll end you and every abomination in this cursed castle," he shouted, rallying the others behind him. In an instant, the mob surged forward, and Hubert and the wolfmen met them head-on. Lightning sparked from Hubert's fists as he struck down the first wave, his electric energy scattering the villagers as they recoiled in terror. The wolfman lunged, his claws flashing in the torchlight as he tore through the ranks, moving with the feral speed and power of the curse that bound him. Inside the castle, Victor's hands flew as he worked, his every thought focused on the formula before him. He barely registered the sounds of battle echoing through the walls. His fingers trembled with excitement as he added the final element to the mixture, watching as the liquid glowed with a strange, almost supernatural light. It was done, a serum that could, in theory, suppress the curse. Victor snatched up the vial and hurried to the balcony overlooking the main hall where the clash raged below. His eyes found Hubert and the wolfmen, fighting side by side, standing against a tide of villagers driven by fear. He saw his son, transformed yet resilient, holding back the very people he had once protected, and beside him, the wolfman, a creature of darkness whose only wish was for salvation. With a voice hoarse from urgency, Victor shouted, "Wolfman, the cure, it's ready!" The words cut through the chaos, reaching the wolfman's ears like a beacon. He whipped around, his eyes locking onto Victor, who held the vial high in his hand, the liquid within shining like the promise of salvation. For a moment, the rage in the wolfman's eyes softened, replaced by something raw and vulnerable, a glimmer of hope. Hubert sensed the shift and turned to the wolfman, his electric energy dissipating as he stepped back. "Go," he urged, his voice steady. "I'll hold them off. Take the cure." The wolfman nodded, and with a final glance at Hubert, he leaped through the crowd, his movements swift as he dodged the villagers' blows. In a moment, he was at Victor's side, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he stared at the vial in the doctor's hand. Victor held out the cure, his gaze somber. "This may be your last chance to be something more. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" he said. "Once you take it, the curse may be broken, or it may fail. There are no guarantees." The wolfman looked down at the vial, his hands shaking as he accepted it. For years he had wandered, cursed to live in shadows, hunted by those who feared him. Now, in this small vial, he held the possibility of freedom. Without a word, he uncorked the vial and drank, feeling the liquid burn as it slid down his throat, a strange warmth spreading through his body. The effect was immediate, his vision blurred, his muscles tensing as his body seemed to fight against the foreign substance. He dropped to his knees, a strangled cry escaping his lips as the serum began to work, attacking the curse from within. The villagers stopped, watching in awe and fear as the wolfman's body writhed, his form flickering between beast and man. And then, as the moonlight faded, his transformation ceased. He looked down at his hands, Human hands, free from claws and fur. His face softened, the feral rage replaced by an exhausted, weary calm. He was whole. Victor watched with quiet satisfaction, feeling a strange pride mixed with relief. He had done it. He had broken the curse. But his triumph was short-lived as the mob turned their attention back to him, seeing the creator of monsters standing before them. "Witch!" they all shouted. Hubert moved to the front, his electric glow intensifying as he raised his hands, the message clear. "Leave," he commanded, his voice filled with an authority that sent a shiver through the crowd. "The creature you sought is gone. Go back to your homes." One by one, the villagers lowered their weapons, their anger dulled by the sight of the broken, exhausted wolfman standing beside Hubert. They turned, retreating into the forest, leaving the castle silent once more. As the last of them disappeared into the trees, Hubert turned to the wolfman, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "You're free now," he said quietly. "Free to live as you once did." The wolfman looked at him, gratitude and sorrow mingling in his gaze. "And you, Frankenstein?" he asked. "Will you ever be free?" "I told you before there is no cure for what I am," Frankenstein shouted, scaring the once wolfman. Hubert's face hardened, his electric glow dimming. "This is my curse," he replied. "I am bound to this place, to my father's work." With a final nod, the once wolfman turned and left, his steps lighter than they had been in years, while Hubert and Victor watched in silence, each of them carrying the weight of their monstrous existence. The town below Castle Frankenstein lay in ruins. Fires blazed in the streets, casting an orange glow across the terrified faces of the villagers who huddled together, praying for a miracle. But as the cries of the undead echoed through the alleys, hope seemed like a distant memory. The undead were everywhere. Rotting corpses lumbering through the cobblestone streets, their lifeless eyes fixed on anything warm-blooded. A horde of zombies had descended upon the village, a plague that threatened to consume every living soul. Just as panic reached its peak, a stranger strode into town, a tall figure draped in a dark cloak, his presence exuding a dark power that made the air grow still. Dracula had arrived from Transylvania, his eyes gleaming with an unholy light as he surveyed the chaos around him. He could smell the decay of the undead, a scent that mingled with the desperation of the villagers. As Dracula moved through the town, the villagers who had once feared him clutched at his cloak, falling to their knees. "Please," they begged, their voices trembling with fear. "Help us, Lord Dracula, these creatures. They're unstoppable." Dracula's eyes narrowed as he watched the hordes of zombies swarm the streets. He wasn't here to play hero, but the situation piqued his curiosity. If he were to claim the power of Frankenstein's serum for himself, it wouldn't hurt to play the role of a savior just this once. "You will have my help," Dracula said, his voice dark and commanding. "But I am not alone." At that moment, another towering figure appeared at the edge of town, his body illuminated by faint electric light, the Frankenstein monster, known as Hubert. The neon serum pulsed within his veins, casting an eerie glow across his stitched body. He moved toward Dracula, his expression one of grudging acceptance. They were here for different reasons, but the undead had made them allies, however briefly. The villagers gasped, torn between their fear of the two monsters and their desperate need for protection. "Please, save us," they cried, their voices unsteady. "The zombies, they're endless." Dracula looked at Hubert, his face set in a grim smile. "It seems the humans need their monsters tonight." Hubert nodded, his electric energy crackling. "Let's give them a reason to remember us." Together, the unlikely allies launched into battle. Hubert's fists crackled with electricity, each strike sending waves of neon energy through the decaying bodies of the undead, reducing them to ash. Beside him, Dracula moved with lethal grace, his speed unmatched, his fangs gleaming as he tore through the zombie horde. Together, they fought as a force of nature, Dracula with his blood-soaked fury, Hubert with his unrelenting strength, both bound by a dark purpose. The villagers watched in awe as the two monsters decimated the undead. They had always feared Dracula and Frankenstein, but now, in the face of true horror, they saw them as saviors, creatures of darkness who fought to protect them, if only for a moment. As the last of the zombies fell, the villagers cheered, their voices filled with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you, Lord Dracula. Thank you, Frankenstein. But as the cheers faded, a figure emerged from the shadows of the castle gates, Victor Frankenstein himself, watching the scene with cold eyes, a twisted smile playing on his lips. He called out, his voice dripping with false concern. Hubert, my son, Victor said, his tone heavy with manipulation. Come inside, where it's safe. These humans, they don't understand you. They will turn on you the moment you let down your guard. Hubert looked at him, his face a mixture of defiance and suspicion. He had never felt truly free under Victor's control. Now, after fighting beside Dracula, he felt a glimmer of independence, a taste of what life could be like without his creator's manipulative grasp. Dracula watched the exchange, his keen eyes taking in Victor's intentions. He leaned toward Hubert, his voice low and laced with disdain. He fears your strength, Frankenstein. He would rather see you chained than allow you to walk free. Victor's gaze sharpened, his face a mask of forced kindness. Come now, Hubert, he said, gesturing to the castle gates. The villagers may cheer for you today, but they'll fear you again soon enough. You belong here, with me, where you are safe. Hubert clenched his fists, the electric energy within him growing stronger and brighter. Safe? Or caged? He demanded, his voice thick with anger. You've kept me here hidden in the shadows, only letting me out when it suits you. But tonight, I saw what it feels like to be free. Victor's smile twisted into a scowl. I created you, Hubert. Without me, you would still be dead. You owe me your loyalty. Dracula's eyes narrowed, a dark amusement flickering within them. You speak of loyalty, Victor, yet you hold him prisoner. Perhaps it is you who fears the power you've unleashed. Victor's face darkened, his hand drifting toward a hidden lever beside the gate. I don't fear him, Dracula, but I do know what's best for him. Hubert, you will return to your chamber. I cannot allow you to roam free. It's for your good. As he pulled the lever, the iron gates swung shut, trapping Hubert within the castle grounds. Chains rattled down from above, thick and rusted, wrapping around Hubert's limbs, binding him to the walls. Victor's eyes gleamed with a twisted satisfaction as he watched his creation struggle. Do you see, Hubert? Victor sneered. You are mine. You will remain in this castle, hidden away from a world that would never accept you. But as the chains tightened, Hubert's rage grew, the electric serum surging within him, pushing against the restraints. His eyes met Victor's, and at that moment, he made his decision. No, Hubert growled, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. I am no longer your creation. I am Hubert. With a surge of power, Hubert shattered the chains, the electric energy bursting from his body, illuminating the courtyard in a flash of neon light. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury as he advanced toward Victor, his creator finally looking upon him with fear. Hubert, don't do this, Victor stammered, backing away, his voice quivering. I am your father. I brought you back. You brought me back, Hubert said, his voice deadly calm. But you kept me in chains. Victor's pleas fell on deaf ears as Hubert's hand shot out, grabbing Victor by the throat. I spent my entire life serving your twisted ambition, Hubert hissed, but now I choose my fate. With a final surge of electric energy, Hubert tightened his grip, silencing Victor's protests. As the scientist's body went limp, the neon glow illuminating the horror etched into his face. Victor Frankenstein, the man who had played God, was finally no more. As Victor's body fell to the ground, Hubert turned, breathing heavily as he surveyed the silent castle. The chains lay in broken pieces around him, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his curse lifting, replaced by the freedom he had craved for so long. Behind him, Elena stepped forward, her pale face softened by an expression of quiet pride. She had watched him struggle, watched him resist his creator's control, and now, seeing him standing free, she moved to his side, taking his hand. You're free now, she whispered, her voice filled with quiet wonder. Hubert looked down at her, his gaze softened. Yes, he replied, free. Together, hand in hand, they left the castle, walking into the night as the villagers watched in stunned silence. Dracula, lingering in the shadows, nodded in approval, a slight smile playing on his lips. He too had known the taste of freedom after centuries of confinement, and now he watched as Hubert claimed his own. As the castle faded behind them, Hubert and Elena moved forward, leaving behind the shadows of their creation. They were bound not by chains, but by their own choice, a king and queen of their own making, stepping into a world that would fear them but would never again hold them.